So thank you for taking a minute to sit with me here for Spotlight Series. I'm excited to learn a little bit about you and your story and your background. If we could get started and you could introduce yourself and just share a little bit about yourself, that'd be a great way to get going here.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Justin Smith. I'm currently a product lead at Rippling, based out of Boulder, Colorado. We've been here for a handful of years. Started my career in the Bay, where we were there for almost 10 years, went up to Seattle for a couple of years, and ultimately made our way over to Colorado, which we've been here for a few years now.
Great. What is a product lead?
That is a good question. It means something different everywhere. I mean, I think like one of the things that I've noticed, especially within products, titles are completely arbitrary. They're completely made up. So what it means for us, what it means for Rippling is product lead is we don't have managers, we don't have sort of like entry level, we just have product managers and product leads. And product lead oversees an entire area. And so like we have the concept of a DRI, a directly responsible individual. I am the DRI for my area, which includes marketing, tech, design, products, all of that. So it's meant to sort of be that sort of like functional role, which is slightly broader than just sort of like managing the product strategy and product roadmap for my area.
What was your background that led you to be able to get into this? It seems like it's almost a mini founder role, if I hear how you're describing it, because you just said a bunch of different functions, and so I'm curious, kind of what was the path there? How did you end up in the role?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and Rippling has a big culture of we talk a lot about being founder centric and hiring a bunch of ex founders, and that's sort of the mentality. So I actually started my career. I went to school for mechanical engineering, sort of like made my way through the first couple of roles, working in architecture and engineering. And I was in the Bay Area during 2010-ish, where it was just sort of, there was no pedigree to get into tech. It was very much sort of the Wild West. And so to some extent, I was in the right place and right time and convinced people that I could be a UX designer because they had no ability to tell me otherwise. And so I was a designer for a number of years, and was at Amazon and Alexa and a couple other companies where I sort of like cut my teeth on being a designer and really enjoyed it. And like it's something that it was always easy for me to do. Like that is very natural for me to pursue. Like I enjoy even now sort of like doing visual design projects on the side just as a sort of like hobby, but always was sort of driven by like the bigger and bigger picture. Wanting to understand the business side, understanding the sort of like sales side and the monetization side. And so to some extent, really just started like spending a bunch of my sort of extracurricular time learning about that. I pursued founder paths up until about 9 months ago before the market took sort of a hard turn. I was like looking at getting funding for my own thing. And so like that entire scope of understanding how a product fits into a portfolio, how it fits into the sort of like customer needs, cycle, sales, all of that was always really fascinating. And again, like within product, there's not a sort of fine definition on what it means and what background you need to have. And so to some extent, there's a fake it till you make it, and finding someone who's willing to take that risk and that investment in you. And so for me, it was just sort of like continuing to gather the skills and opportunities and sort of experiences until I actually could like A, convince myself that I could do that, and B, I could convince, other people.
I love that. As kind of a corollary, what is it that you love about the work that you do?
I love that this is like probably the most inane answer. It like genuinely is always different. The thing that I really love is the breadth that I sort of get to go through and how every day is quite different. And so I love understanding the way that these problems work, regardless of whether that's like right now, one of the products I work on is financial in nature, and we're going global. And so it's understanding like financial compliance and all these like just like sort of arbitrary topics. But the thing that I really love doing is just like understanding how they work, figuring out how we can sort of like create the right strategy to solve them. And that's the thing that I really love with my current job, is that there are so many different interfaces and so many different sort of like surface areas. I really enjoy that a lot.
As an aside, I saw that announcement recently, and I thought it was awesome. It's kind of like I think Deal is doing this, but then the approach of being able to do it all kind of with a full stack approach so that you're not just sitting on top of another system is just one of the many things that I like about Rippling. That's
I'm biased, but yeah, totally.
Cool. Okay. So next question for you. What do you think is the most challenging part of the work that you do? What is the hardest to kind of wrap your mind around, or the hardest to do really well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I can say, at least at like my current seniority, my current company, the thing that has like always struck me as really difficult about products in particular is the subjectivity to it. There's no right or wrong answer. You can't, like, if they tell you can measure it, they're probably lying. You know what I mean? Like for many product decisions, that there's just so much subjectivity to it, and you can't really experiment and like measure to the outcome. Like that, I think, is the part that is really quite hard. Is that you really do have to develop like a framework of frameworks to some extent. Like you have to be able to make decisions reliably and like confidently, and so that other people can understand why you made the decision. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's to some extent up to gut. And I think that that's the part that always kind of scares me, is because you are laying yourself on the line, and like you can't solve everything. You can't pursue every experiment and every sort of like line of questioning until you're entirely competent. And I think that part is like, for me, quite difficult. And it's something that, not that it keeps me up at night, but that's this thing that it's like, when my sort of like blood pressure spikes, it's usually because I'm having to make some sort of call without an entirely sort of, complete data set.
Sure. What are some qualities or characteristics that someone who might ultimately be good at the type of work that you do would see in themselves? So, what is it that they would recognize in themselves? Maybe innately, maybe in terms of kind of where they might be able to grow and develop themselves. But what type of person is going to be really good at this type of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's sort of two things, and this is to some extent viewed through the lens of Rippling and our leadership principles, which I'm like deeply steeped in. So like, forgive me for some of this. We have this notion of like, or this leadership principle of go and see, which is the idea that like if you see a problem, you need to run it to ground to really understand the sort of nuts and bolts of it. And I think that that is something that is like, it's never not valuable. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, it doesn't matter if you're an entry level product manager, whatever it may be. Having that sort of like innate need to understand how something works and like driving it down through really truly understanding how the sort of pieces fit together. So I think that that's like number one, is the ability and the sort of just like innate curiosity to want to put those things together at such a precise level. The second is the gut or instinct or like willingness to learn about sort of prioritization and understanding what hills to die on and which hills not to die on. Because ultimately, your like day is limited, your time is limited. And so being able to sort of quickly determine which problems are worth spending time in and which ones you can sort of just like push aside. I truly don't know if it's nature or nurture or innate or learned, but that especially is something that sticks out to me, is something that like people who are really, really good at the sort of function that I do have that skill. And something that I certainly always want to get better at. But I think people looking at themselves and sort of seeing those two things and being able to quickly pattern match and see what you need to do, as well as when you do find the pattern, being able to like go deep, whatever it is, whether that's financial compliance in Poland or whether that's like some deep tech bug, I think will serve people in products very well.
Absolutely. What is one area of your work that you feel you would most like to improve on? And if you were to improve on that, it would give you the most, I don't know, impacts or leverage on being better at the role that you are currently in.
For me, it's really quite hard to sort of decouple what I want to learn and like what I want to be able to do. Because I think that there's like means to the end types of skills that like, I don't know. Yeah, I'd love to be rich, but like, how do you actually make the money? And I think some of these things sort of, for me, are intertwined. For me, it's really understanding like how the business is working and how to be able to like work really cross-functionally with other folks to not just develop products, but develop the sort of like front end of the strategy. So like one of the things I'm focused on right now is, as we do go globally, where are the little sort of indicators we can start to see, not just from a product perspective, but from an entire business perspective, that should tell us to like double down on investments. It's something that is like, again, just sort of like I'm innately curious about, but that's something that being able to broaden beyond sort of technology and just the sort of like, design, build, test cycle of sort of product design and product engineering, be able to look at like the broader business and how to make sure we are aligned with what sales is seeing, what sort of like, account management is seeing, et cetera, to be able to bring that fully into a picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question for you here. So let's imagine that some student, some young person is watching this interview at some point, and they're call it like they're early in high school or midway through high school, and considering what they want to do with their life professionally, and they're really inspired by what they see Justin doing here, and they want to follow this path. What sort of recommendations would you have for that person, either in terms of the types of skills that they should be developing, the mindsets they should have, the things that they should be developing in themselves so that they can follow this direction?
I think it's really about doing, or rather, let me rephrase that. I think especially within products, there is this sort of like obsession with the big picture and the strategy and the vision, and you have to do before you can get there. You have to be a technician. You have to be sort of a practitioner of something before that. And so I think to be able to have these big picture visions and be able to put them into practice, you need to be able to sort of like have gone through the cycle a few times. And so I think that there's a number of places you can do that, a number of places you can sort of like gain that experience and gain that insight. I personally sort of like went through engineering and got a job in analytics. So I feel very, very comfortable with numbers and data and spreadsheets and like all of the sort of like foundational pieces that I use a lot every single day. Like I can tell you how many hours I've spent in Excel, and not that I spend many hours in Excel now, but my ability to quickly like diagnose a problem through Excel or through spreadsheets is something that has like served me very well. So I would sort of like encourage folks to think about or pick a lane of just something that will sort of give them the business skills, give them the foundations to build on. I think I potentially chose a specialty or like wanted to stay in a narrow lane too early. And I think the best thing I could have done, or that I would encourage other folks to do, is like accumulate a broad set of those foundational skills as you continue to sort of like develop and learn what the market looks like, what jobs look like, and what you really want to do.
I said that was the last question, but it was kind of a lie. So I actually thought of one more as we were going there. So when you think about, maybe there's a spectrum between kind of analytical thinking and on the other side, creative thinking, maybe. I don't know if that's a fair spectrum to think about. Where do you think that the work that you do kind of lies on that spectrum? Is it smack in the middle? Is it more on one side? Is it more on the other side? And then if we can relate that back to this hypothetical person that we're talking about and how they might develop these types of skills, whether they be creative or analytical, how do you think about that, and what would your recommendation there be?
I think everybody wants to think that they're like super unique and super. I've always thought of myself as purely in the middle of those two things, and always felt like, certainly I was in school, I was like kind of a terrible student, and I always felt like I was sort of choiced to pick a lane between math and science or like art and design. And I always just like felt very uncomfortable. So always tried to sort of like hold both in my hands at the same time. And I can tell you now, like my job specifically very much combines both. I think based on time of year and based on type of like feature or product we're developing, it sort of like, goes back and forth between those two things. So I would say, like me personally, I have like found a certain amount of success by being able to sort of like straddle both of those. And I would say, regardless, being able to have some empathy or some recognition of the other side always, I think, makes a better rounded person, individual. I like previously have advised for a Designer Fund, which is a VC that focuses specific like on design-led companies. And we did a business for a design class because a lot of designers just like naturally don't get that, especially if they come up through an art or sort of like creative focused program. They just never see numbers, and the vice versa is also true. So I think being able to like pursue both and at least have recognition of it, like you don't have to be an accountant and a fine artist, but being able to like have some familiarity with one and know that it's not just like completely tangential paths. Like there is some middle ground and some back and forth between them.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. Justin, I thank you for taking a minute to share your story and your thoughts on your professional path with us, and I appreciate it. So thank you.